I am a man, and I have a lot of thoughts to share.
Let's face it, guys only want one thing.
John C.
No! God, please, no! No!
Welcome back to Torn Apart, and today we're talking about, well, one thing that I already mentioned in the past, mostly because, well, it's over now, and I can finally tell you whether it's good or not. I'm talking about Agatha All Along, of course. I was actually trying to think whether I had anything more to say about this series, and to be honest, I had such a great time that I was like, I have to come back and give you my opinion, give you my deconstruction, and also give you my overall thoughts about why they should definitely take this as an example of a series that needs to be recreated with different characters in the future within the MCU on Disney+.
Time to finish the road. Last one there is a nice person.
Follow me, my friend, to glory at the end.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about is the substance, because yes, I live in France and we got to see it only, well, this week technically. I was at the premiere last week, so this is gonna be me going over women-led shows and films and trying to tell you what I think about it, because I'm pretty sure that I have some interesting things to say. But let's start with something easy, something chill. Agatha All Along, which was created by Jac Schaeffer and is starring Kathryn Hann. Something that I actually forgot to mention last time I was here talking about this series is that Kathryn Hann's performance is incredible. She's been on so many different films across the years, and we've mostly seen her in weird Judd Apatow-esque rom-coms or raunchy comedies, and honestly I've never seen a good performance from her, as in like something that actually made me go like, oh, now I know what to refer her to when it comes to audiences if they want to look at something that she did, which she was incredible in. And now we have something, because she's incredibly in Agatha All Along, and there is something that I really enjoyed about it is the fact that even though it kind of starts like Loki, as in like we're taking a character out of the MCU, kind of like isolating him or her from the rest of the team and from the rest of the overall timeline or plot, and we're trying to redeem her slash him and make her into like a sympathetic anti-hero kind of character. I was afraid that this was what the series was gonna turn out to be, but actually no, it wasn't. It was really clear actually the Agatha's character was pretty much staying the same from the first episode to the end, but it's mostly that our perception and our understanding of her character changed throughout all of the different episodes. And of course there are so many interesting plot twists across the way which kind of like help us and give us some keys of reading which make us understand basically what she's been through and why she is the way that she is. I also know there are a lot of hints like to comic book things, and honestly I haven't read any of those comics specifically. To be honest, any of the magic related stuff in the MCU, I've read absolutely nothing about them in the comics, which is a shame because I think it's definitely the most interesting part. And one thing that I loved about this series is, first of all, how Halloween-y it felt. I loved all the different references to, well, different witchcraft shows and movies, which is something I mentioned in my previous video as well. And I also loved how the magic looked and how all the demons and the creatures looked as well. I love the fact that even though the budget was definitely quite low, they really played with it. Every single episode looked different, and there were always a lot of interesting cliffhangers that basically made you want to come back the week after. This is probably one of the first MCU shows in a really long time, probably since WandaVision, that I've wanted to come back to find out what was going on. And the other one before this was probably Loki, of course, and maybe Moon Knight, but mostly because I was desperately waiting for it to get better. And it's also one of those series that like is so incredibly weird and not a lot of people know what it is about because they haven't read the comics. And I actually read some Moon Knight comics. And WandaVision, of course. WandaVision was one of those shows where you didn't know what to expect, because before WandaVision, Scarlet Witch was not really one of the main characters. She was an interesting character, but like she was always left on the sidelines. in my opinion, and it's thanks to the series that she becomes something way more powerful, way more interesting, and she really introduced the kind of like supernatural magic to the MCU a little bit more than Doctor Strange, because I always felt that Doctor Strange, just because as a character he's so scientific, he's so practical and logical, he doesn't really have that kind of supernatural magic feeling. He kind of has that more like Buddhist magical feeling where everything makes sense, and magic is kind of like science with an extra step, which is kind of like Thor explained it like back in Thor 1 as well. When it comes to Scarlet Witch, when it comes to Agatha as well, these are the first time that it actually feels like we're looking at magic. We're talking at people playing with tarot cards, we're talking to people who have been cursed, who do not have access to their powers anymore. We have people who have tragic backstories which are so interesting, and every single woman in this show has such an interesting way of portraying her character that honestly they stick to my mind. I was sitting here a couple of days after the show ended and I was being like, I actually remember these characters' names, I actually remember their faces as well, and how they died or what they did in the show as well. And besides the characters, another way where I was able to tell that this was an incredibly well written show is the fact that once it ended and the plot twist kind of like came out of nowhere, even though there were a lot of Easter eggs of course, as I'm gonna mention right after, I wanted to see the series again, and this almost never happens. This probably happened only with WandaVision, and when I was like, by knowing this, it definitely gets better and better every single time that you watch it. Agatha All Along is the same thing. I love that basically they embrace the structure of WandaVision, where it's all about witchcraft and it's all about illusions and it's all about playing with your expectations as well. They redid that, but you couldn't see it coming, because I was like, there is no way they're gonna do it again, and they still did it again, and it paid off. That was the incredible thing about it, and also the tragic thing about it. One thing that I love about witchcraft within the MCU and the way that it's been established within this series, it's the tragedy behind it. A lot of people dying, making sacrifices, signing pacts with the devil as well, and at the end of the day, even though they are trying to become the most powerful witch in the universe, it never actually pays off, because as they clearly explain, there are different types of magic, different types of witches as well, and even if you become the most powerful witch in one specific like subcategory, you will never be able, for example, to heal someone. You will never be able to grow things out of nowhere like a green witch would be able to, for example, or you will not be able to create illusions out of nowhere like the Scarlet Witch is able to do as well. Do I have to say it? Spoiler alert for Agatha All Along. All the different plot twists, all the characters being revealed and everything, because I want to go deep into it and tell you why I loved it so much. Billy is in this show, as in Scarlet Witch's son, and honestly it was quite cool. I love the way they introduced it, I love the flashbacks as well, and I also love the idea that like he's kind of like lost his memory, but he's not lost his consciousness. So he knows that he's not who he's supposed to be, but at the same time, since he doesn't have the memories that define him, he can't really like be his whole person. And that's something that is so interesting, like the idea of what makes us who we are and who are we at the end of the day, and basically how his journey kind of meddled itself with Agatha's journey as well. And also the whole idea that the ballad was basically created by Agatha and her son as basically like a scam to lure witches in and steal their powers is so interesting. And also the idea that this ballad has kind of like taken a life of its own at the end of the day, and it has become like a protection curse from certain witches, for example, and it also becomes something so iconic that people like almost think it as a fairy tale, as something that is definitely believed but that no one has seen with their own eyes, so they don't know really what to do with it. And I really love that, and the whole idea that Billy is able to use his powers without really knowing how and creates these trials for himself and for the witches around him is so incredibly cool. And I also love the tragic aspect of it, for example, that you see in the final episode where he finds out, of course, that everything was created by his own mind and his power, and his latent power most specifically. And I love that he feels guilty about basically killing these people, and he doesn't realize that, even though yeah, he was definitely behind all of the pain that he had to go through, at the same time it was probably the first time ever since the trial was never never real, that it became real. And for one witch in specific, it was real because she was able to get what she wanted from it. She was able to get unbound, to break the curse. And same thing goes with all of the other witches as well. One was able, for example, to finally piece all of the memories back together since her childhood, thanks to everything that was going on. And I really love that, the idea of basically a witch that is able to tell the future and other people's futures specifically, not being able to tell her own future and missing some puzzle pieces that basically define her consciousness, and how everything like came together by the end of her episode where she ends up dying. Of course, I really love that. And also the idea of a mother creating a protection curse for her daughter, even though she was definitely a little bit kind of like sad that her journey ended like this, because it's kind of like those things where like you deal with your trauma. It's kind of like going to therapy and then magically finding out that, oh, that is my problem, I know how to fix it, and then you immediately die and then there is nothing after. So I can definitely relate to her struggle, and her story was definitely tragic, and I really like the fact that she got that moment of peace with Death, of course, who was played by Aubrey Plaza. I love that moment because it would have been so easy to just leave it on the side. And I also loved how this season was structured. This felt like a television series, as in every single episode, of course, was different, but also every single episode was connected to the next one, and sometimes not necessarily to the next one, but the one right after, in the same way that we got like bottle episodes, for example, with certain specific characters back in the days. For sitcoms, for example, if you want to take one type of structure specifically, like the 22 episode kind of series where you actually have the time to not see certain characters for quite some time, so you actually get to miss them, and also it kind of creates a tiny plot twist where you're like, oh, I forgot about them, I thought they were supposed to be dead, I thought they were supposed to be gone. So this is such a clever way of doing storytelling, because it's nuanced. Like you spend like 2 weeks basically wondering what happened to this character, and when finally the story gives you the answer, you feel satisfied. You feel that sort of satisfaction that was so common in the series that came out before the streaming era, basically. One thing that I loved, of course, it's all the repercussions of course, Billy finding out that he has so much power, almost as much as his mother, but if I'm not mistaken, I've heard that he's actually even more powerful than the Scarlet Witch, and that within the comics, he almost like becomes some kind of like god figure. So he's really powerful, and the idea that, of course, Kathryn Hann / Agatha becomes a ghost by the end, and it's kind of like a punishment, but at the same time, she probably didn't want to die, and she said to herself that she didn't want to die, she doesn't want her story to end, and she wants to keep going. And I love the fact that the penultimate episode ends with her manic laugh, and you don't really know what to expect. So actually, I wished that there was not a 2-episode finale, and that we got to see the final episode like this week, basically, so that we got to speculate a little bit more about what was going to happen. But it was okay. At the end of the day, I was happy this ended, mostly because Halloween ended at the same time, so I'm pretty sure that's what their strategy was. I'm looking forward to Billy going into his own adventures. He could join the Young Avengers at the end of the day, I don't really mind. I just really hope that Jac Schaeffer is going to be able to get maybe another series greenlit, because she's the only one who has managed to capture what it means to make an actual TV series. And now we've got actually a couple of trailers and teaser trailers of what is coming next year from the MCU. There are certain shows which look fantastic, and it looks like actual TV. It doesn't look like content, and I'm talking mostly about Daredevil Born Again, which looks almost like a season 4 of Daredevil, which is a really good thing. And of course, Spider-Man the animated series has that kind of feeling as well, where it feels really detached from everything in a really good way. But the series that gets me worried is Iron Heart. The effects look so incredibly bad. It kind of looks like a Power Ranger show, and I really don't understand why they would decide to give the armors these kind of looks. Maybe it's because like 2008 was a really long time ago, and back then we were still kind of like okay about superheroes wearing basically soldier armor and having miniguns coming out of their shoulders and stuff like that. Today we're not really doing that stuff anymore. Now it's more science fiction. Now it has to look a little bit more fancy for it to be believable, or also for it to be embraced by the main audience. But at the same time, this looks very cringy. I know it's super early to tell, but at the same time, I really hope that it's gonna be an interesting series. But she was not that interesting in Wakanda Forever. One thing that I was kind of confused about, first of all, I don't really know why Agatha and Death are in love. I never got that. Were they in love before she made the pact to basically give some more time to her son so that he could be born and they could spend a couple of years together, or whether they fell in love after the death of his son for one reason or another. I saw like a lot of speculations online about this kind of stuff. So I'm gonna give you like my theory approximately. I have 1/2. One theory is that basically when she was like pregnant and she was giving birth next to that lake in the middle of nowhere, Death shows up and it basically meant that he was gonna be a stillborn, that her son basically was gonna die there in labor, and that basically she didn't really know how, but she made a pact with Death to give her son a little bit more years, but at the end of the day, a couple of years later, he still got sick and he died because it's the 1700s, and of course you end up dying, right? It makes a lot of sense. My theory is that the way that she got back something to Death, it's basically the witch's souls. So that basically she killed all of those witches, the souls would actually go to Death herself, and Agatha would get the power. And I feel like the power that she would get from these witches was kind of like a consolation prize at the beginning at least, and then slowly it turned into something that made her feel like more powerful, and maybe made her feel like she could actually protect her son even better, or even from death at the end of the day. And so it makes sense why she would be so obsessed about trying to steal power from witches constantly over and over and over again, because basically she thought that if she gave enough souls to Death, she would probably keep her son alive for forever, maybe, why not, or for as long as she was alive as well. But this didn't really happen, and this gets me quite confused, because like, why would she keep getting all of those souls for Death? My theory is that maybe she traded her own life instead of the other witches' lives for her son's death, and so just by keeping that hunt going for the other witches, she hoped that she would be able to stay out of the radar of Death forever as well, and maybe become powerful enough to defeat her. But at the same time, she's supposed to be in love with Death, right? That's basically what they imply within the Witch's Road. So I'm really confused. I don't really know exactly how that happened, and that is the only thing that I probably didn't like about this series, that this is the only type of flashbacks that didn't work out for me, mostly because it was done very quickly, and you were supposed to fall in love with the tragic child and understand basically why everyone hated Agatha at the end of the day, and why she was like seeking power for such a long time, and they kind of forgot to establish her relationship with Death. I feel like if the flashbacks were about the relationship with her son and also the relationship with Death, and how it almost became like a love triad, as in like basically the only thing that she got at the end of the day, since she had no friends, was basically killing people, stealing the powers from these witches, and that created a relationship with Death. I feel like it was missing a little bit of a puzzle piece to make us understand exactly what the relationship was, because I really didn't get it. I also saw this other theory saying that basically she was looking for a powerful witch who would be able to give her enough power so that she could bring her son back, and she thought that Scarlet Witch and the Darkhold put together would be able to actually bring her son back. But actually no, because she was only creating illusions. And that's also the interesting part about this series. I feel like there are some critics who actually described Agatha All Along as making WandaVision even better than it was before, and actually I really agree, because like when you think about it, all of the discussions that Agatha and Wanda end up having about like keeping the children alive and playing with those illusions and kind of creating like a perfect life that doesn't really exist for yourself, it's kind of interesting. And I'm pretty sure that Agatha was looking at it being like, would I be able to do the same thing? Would I be satisfied with that kind of illusion, or do I want the actual real thing? And I'm pretty sure that once she finally finds out who Billy is, she must be so incredibly intrigued about knowing what happened to him and how basically he got to, well, come to life at the end of the day, because he was just an illusion at the beginning, right? It really makes me want to rewatch WandaVision. It makes me want to rewatch Agatha All Along, and that's such a huge compliment for a Marvel thing. Let's give you a little bit of ranking of all the MCU shows that have come out in the last few years. At the tippy top of this list, I'm gonna be putting WandaVision, which is an almost perfect show. Besides the ending and the throwing balls of magic at each other, that was not really interesting. Loki, mostly because it completely defied expectations. It introduced so many interesting things, and it was so incredibly cool. And also, it gave us a new reading of the character of Loki, which was already redeemed in previous films, but in a different way. I don't know, just all of those things put together makes a really, really good show. And I also think that season 1 and 2 complement each other really well, and they're kind of unforgettable, right? Then I would actually put Agatha All Along. Agatha All Along is pretty memorable, it's pretty fun to rewatch as well. It's really almost perfect when you think about it as well. It's maybe just not as filled with cool things as the other previous shows that I mentioned as well. After that, we probably put Miss Marvel, which is a really fun show, even though it has probably the worst villains in all of the MCU shows put together. Then I would put Echo because, well, it surprised me once again, and I think it's one of those series that even though it has such a tight concept, it didn't really overstay its welcome. It was straightforward, interesting, and it felt like something I'd never seen before. And then immediately we get into the bad MCU shows. Like, honestly, there are not that many good MCU shows that I could think of. Like, after this I put Moon Knight, which was a huge disappointment for me, but they got like a couple of points just because I think it was interesting design when it comes to the costume, and it made me laugh a little bit, and it was ambitious at the end of the day, even though it really didn't work out. After that I put Hawkeye because honestly, like, I think it was really bad considering what it did to the Kingpin. Like, it really treated him as a joke. This is probably the worst thing they could have done to like the Daredevil kind of like legacy characters, and I'm really glad that they kind of like tried to do something different after that. Also, it's Hawkeye, it's a Christmas show, it's fun, but like, try to ask me what it was about besides retrieving one's costume, and I have nothing to add. Then we've got the really bad, of course, we've got She-Hulk. I put it above the others once again because of its ambition, mostly because of the final few episodes as well, the idea of like rewriting your own show, but there is almost nothing interesting about this show. After that I put Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which for me is one of the most mediocre MCU shows they could have ever made. Like, I do not like these people within this show. I like them as side characters when they have like this big plot around them and other interesting characters like Captain America, but like within a TV show like this, they just, I don't know, they just feel like they're bored themselves within this show. And at the very end of the MCU shows I put Secret Invasion, which was honestly a waste of time. The controversy with all of the different like AI stuff was disgusting, but I'm gonna link you to all of those discussions if you want, maybe down in the comments or even here at the top, just in case you'd be interested in knowing more. Unfortunately for me, I watch most of the MCU stuff coming out because I always have interesting things to add. But now let's go into the art house business and talk about the substance.
A perfect balance of 7 days each. The one and only thing not to forget. You are one.
Which was one of the best movies I've ever seen. Like, it reminded me of Brandon Cronenberg's work like Antiviral and even Possessor. Of course, Cronenberg's work as well. And I actually watched another film a couple of days ago called From Beyond, which was directed by Stuart Gordon, who is the guy behind the Reanimator. And there are a lot of things that I saw in From Beyond which were literally almost copy and pasted into the substance as well, when it comes to specifically the VFX kind of looks of the monsters, of the body horror like stuff going on. I'm not of course saying that it's a bad thing, I'm saying that it's a really good deep take coming from Coralie Fargeat. I love the performances. This is probably the best performances that Demi Moore has ever put together. Now, honestly, I can't remember any single film that she's been in just because like she was famous like a really long time ago. This is also why she was a perfect actress to play this role as well, and also knowing that she's gone through like different plastic surgeries as well to basically stay as youthful as possible. I feel like if I don't want to spoil this movie too much, I want to talk about the themes. I want to talk about the objectification of women, the way that also I'm pretty sure that if you watch this movie as a man or as a woman, it's completely different to you, because I'm pretty sure that like I'd be so interested in knowing what Michael Bay thinks about this film, just because there are so many different shots of like asses and also like a lot of different things in this movie kind of look like a music video. I really love the editing of this film, and also funny enough it reminded me of Challengers as well. I feel like this is a really good year for like techno music, and the idea of like basically not using lyrics to tell your story, but like to tune it in with like incredibly loud noises. And when you think about it, techno is kind of like the music of expressionism, as in like it kind of like enhances every single thing that you do on screen, whether it's something disgusting going on, whether it's the editing like going really fast paced, but it's not like a type of music that like kind of makes you more emotionally attached to someone, right? So I love that. I love the idea that they used like some kind of like technological, very artificial type of music for a movie like this that is also about how we're basically losing touch with our own humanity and we're transforming our bodies, and we're forcing women, of course, mostly to transform their bodies to kind of like retain any sense of legitimacy within the business, especially in Hollywood, of course, but any kind of content creation nowadays. I mean, let's look even at the fitness industry and stuff like that. It's kind of insane what, in this time around, men and women as well, the stuff that they have to do to themselves to kind of like perfectly play with that illusion and the image that we've built ourselves for what it looks like to be a bodybuilder, what it looks like to be a certain type of woman who goes in fitness. And I'm saying this mostly because fitness is a huge part of this movie. The idea of like body parts being able to stretch, the elasticity in human skin as well, how your eyes are basically like gonna change color the more you age. This movie is really about all of those qualities, and one thing that I really loved about this film, it's the tiny details of how it talks about body dysmorphia and how it's destroying women's mental health as well, and how it's kind of insane because this movie is a fight between you and your younger self, and they keep telling you like there is not a you and another person, you're both the same person. So it's kind of insane that you're beating each other up so much and you're hurting each other so much because you should be working together. You're the exact same person, you share this exact same life. And it's really funny because like I tried to put myself in women's shoes this time around, and it's so funny because like I try to imagine myself taking the substance and being, of course, the older person staying at home like basically for a week, and then being young and doing young things stuff for another week. I would have loved being old, mostly because as a guy, like the older you get, I feel like the more respect you get from society as well, unless you get to the really old age where basically even within politics like you're not represented anymore. But if you think about it, rich people and people who also don't have any debt anymore, people who have the most amount of time, it's mostly like white men. So that says a lot, I think. The whole idea that basically these white men are the people who are basically like shaping society. The men in politics are mostly white, really old men as well. If you look at people working in the tech industries, people working in the fashion industries, the people at the tippy top once again are white old men. And it's kind of interesting because there is this thing of like as you age as a woman, I feel like it takes you a really long time and way longer than for men to actually like reclaim your own life, because as you age, society is asking you to have children, then to take care of those children, then after you take care of those children, maybe create more children once again. At the same time, the feminist movement is asking you like to create balance in your life, so basically you can feel fulfilled, you can be like a girl boss and stuff like that, but at the same time you have to fulfill all of your other like duties. You have to be a good housewife, you have to be a good mother. There are so many different expectations coming with being a woman. They are not the same at all with being a man. And I see it also with my mother, for example, and my grandmother as well. The fact that my grandmother had to take care of my granddad at the very end of his life as well, and I could see it in her that it was kind of like stealing away kind of like years and years of her life, and now she kind of like doesn't know how to live anymore because she spent so much time taking care of him. Of course it is a cute thing, but at the same time, like, do men do the exact same thing? And I think most of the cases I would hope that to say yes, but since women tend to like live longer as well than men, there are so many women who even when they get the freedom that they finally deserve, they work their entire life, they've gone through all these kind of like sexual harassment and violent harassment at work, and they've literally like created human beings out of their own bodies, and they still manage to like get up in the morning and like do normal people stuff. Even then they still have to take care of others, and it's kind of insane because like when you're socialized as a man, you're not really told that you need to take care of others. And it's a really interesting thing also if you link this with capitalism, socialism, and the idea of loss of community, the idea that maybe men as well well will start caring about others. Of course, it will take like a long time to actually teach them how to do it and teach myself how to do it, of course, as well. I'm not like gonna put myself at the same like pedestal as women, of course. It's impossible to do that. As I said, this is a hard movie to watch because you know as you're watching it that you're part of the problem. I was listening to this review, which was fascinating, of this guy talking about all of the same things that I did from a feminist perspective, but he was talking about the male gaze, and the male gaze, how it's probably perceived so differently from a man's perspective and from a woman's perspective. As women, I'm pretty sure that you see it as like a body dysmorphia thing, as in within this movie it's showing you all the things that you were, that you are, and maybe that you will never be. So it makes you feel like disgusted with yourself and not necessarily with the way that women are portrayed, mostly because this is not what Coralie Fargeat is trying to do with this film, specifically with those kind of scenes. That's what I think anyways. Maybe she is doing that when she's kind of like cutting away to all the men, looking and analyzing the footage and trying to see exactly which portion of her ass didn't look exactly the same in that like half a second, you know? When she's doing that, of course she is. And within the text as well, when you see men like asking women to smile, even though they've been through the most traumatizing thing ever, which they're not allowed to share, because if you are, you'll be labeled as a difficult woman to work with in the industry. It's insane because you never get it right. Whatever you do, you always have to please someone who is above you, who is very often a man, and very often a very disgusting man as well. But what I was trying to say is that, and what the other guy was saying in the review, the male gaze seen from a guy's perspective, it's kind of fascinating because there was so much objectification that you kind of like sit there being like, these women are really hot. Like, I'm actually enjoying the way that they're being portrayed, and I feel like it's part of the problem. As in, Coralie Fargeat, in the way that she built this film, she made men and women feel in completely different way, and both are kind of complementing the message of the film itself. And it's kind of fascinating. I love that. I love the idea that you can have a film which kind of like works on so many different layers, and that you could see, even though maybe you cannot identify with all of them, you can see them and understand them and appreciate them, right? It's kind of insane because I was sitting there being like, Margareth Qualley is like so beautiful. She's like flawless. She's incredible. And I love her performance in this movie, but she doesn't really do that much, which is kind of interesting. She's mostly like a body that is moving around. It's a very young thing to think about when you actually reflect on it. The idea of maybe when you're young, it's more about what you can get out of society, what you can get from men thanks to your body, and not necessarily like basically what you have to say. And maybe this is also why, for example, society as a whole is kind of like shooting down women, especially young women who have opinions, who have done incredible things, and they're like, oh, you're young, you do not understand anything. And they do that mostly to women as well, mostly because they want them to just look nice, to just look happy, because it kind of like reflects a society that you would like to be able to see reflected back at you, right? Even if you look at the entire blood, the gore, the idea of kind of like destroying your body and your version of self to kind of like try to make everyone around you happy. By the way, I haven't given you any spoilers on purpose because like I want you to seek it out, I want you to see it. This is even more gory than Terrifier 3 in my opinion, mostly because there is actual human emotions attached to the gore and trauma as well, which could definitely hurt like a lot of people if you have gone through like body dysmorphia, if you've been anorexic or bulimic and stuff like that, or if you have problems with your image as well. While Terrifier kind of becomes something that is fun to watch because it's ridiculous. Like, it's kind of like pushing the limits of the human body to their extreme, but almost in a fun and playful way. While The Substance is pushing the limits of the human body to extremes that make you feel sad. Like, you arrive at the very third act of this movie feeling like completely drained, but also energetic. Like, you feel like you've been through a journey and you want more. You want more, you want more. You want her to inject herself with more substance so that you can change her body even more. You want to see where it goes. This reminds me also of Love Lies Bleeding. If you've seen it this year, it's the same kind of thing that you can see with like steroids as well. And this idea of how it's changing your body, but at the same time like changing your mood as well, and society sees you as you want it to see you as well. And I also love the idea that this movie is like very American, like in a way that there are so many shots of palm trees seen from the bottom, which is kind of like the look of people who are going through Beverly Hills, for example, and looking at all of these like incredible things that look beautiful, but they will never be able to reach. There is this entire thing of like shots, for example, of entire like bathrooms becoming like seamless and kind of like infinite, because there is this idea of like basically our main character losing herself way more, but also the idea of like trying to achieve something that it's almost impossible, because beauty standards change all the time. You will never be able to actually satisfy everyone with your body. That's the crazy thing about it. If you compare all of this stuff with like TikTok and the filters, the stuff that people basically use now on an everyday basis, because there are some people who vlog using these kind of like makeup filters so that they always look with makeup on and they never actually look like themselves, which is probably something that women find easy to do because at least they don't have to do it, but it kind of like it's changing your own perspective of self as well, because then when you see yourself in the mirror, you will not see the filter anymore, you will see your actual face. And how will you react to that? Because at least if you're actually doing the act of putting makeup on your face, you're kind of like participating in the illusion. But if someone is very easily putting just a filter on you, and I don't know, there is this idea also of making plastic surgery so incredibly accessible to everyone, doing Botox as young as possible, and I just love how this film managed to talk about all of those points all at once. The idea of giving birth, the idea of women being portrayed just as boobs and asses, and like, yeah, basically things that appeal to the male gaze and things that appeal to men specifically. There's also a lot of play on blood. There's also a lot of female rage in this movie. I'm pretty sure that if you like Titan, you're gonna love this movie as well, but even more because I feel like this is something that is very raw and primal. Of course, if you've seen her previous film Revenge, you're gonna like this film as well. And honestly, I don't know why this didn't get the Palme d'Or. This is the Palme d'Or for me. I'm gonna forget about Honora, which is a good film, of course, but I'm still gonna forget about it because this has so many more interesting things to say than rich versus poor bad, which is basically what Honora is saying as well, because it's basically a reinterpretation of the Cinderella story and it is talking about sex work as well. But this is so much more, and it's driving me insane at the end of the day because she only got the screenwriting prize and I wanted her to get so much more. Honestly, if none of the actresses get like any kind of recognition at the Oscars, I'm gonna go absolutely insane. And Coralie Fargeat, I hope that she gets like a lot of buzz so she can get nominated as Best Director as the Oscar, because she really deserves it. And sometimes it happens with horror films, it's really rare, but if she gets enough buzz, it is possible as well. And it will never go, of course, to Best International Film because everyone is American in it, so there is no purpose of doing that. But anyways, I feel like these are all the things that I had to say about this film. What did you think about it? Do you think that a man like me had actually interesting things to say about this film? Do you think I'm completely wrong? Did I completely like misread the meaning of this film? And if I didn't, well, give me just some clapping emoji down in the bottom being like, you're such a good ally. You know girls. You know women, well done. Well, I hope that I managed to understand what this movie was trying to do, because otherwise it would be kind of weird because I spent so much time talking about it. Anyways, if you like this video, here at the bottom, as usual, I'm gonna be putting other types of videos which go along the lines of the themes that I talked about today. And here at the top, I'm gonna be talking about, well, the final few topics of the year. So we're approaching the end of the year, so of course, you'll be getting worst movies of the year as well as the best movies of the year, and then a special secret video that I'm working on with a friend of mine, which is gonna be very fun. Having said that, don't forget to smash that like button. Every single time that you do that, guess what? You inject yourself with the substance and you become a better version of yourself, a yassified version of yourself.
Can I count on you?
Would you like to do that? Don't forget, you're one. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
Sydney Sweeney.
Da 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 da.